let us move towards the collection of herbs, herbal materials. So for collection of medicinal plant, a proper time should be selected. Do you feel that the proper timing should be selected for the collection of the herbal raw material? Say for example, take example of amla. When amla should be collected, whether we are collecting the leaves, stems, barks or fruits. In the case of amla, we are using the amla fruit, isn't it? That is being considered, it is having a medicinal value. So when it should be collected, there should be the proper timing. When it is in the ripe stage, then and then only it should be collected. So timing, it is a very important thing when we are collecting the herbal raw material. So for the collection of medicinal plant, a proper time should be selected. Herbs are selected for collection at the stage when they yield maximum amount of chemical constituents. When we should go for the collection, when the plant or herb consists of the maximum amount of the chemical constituent, or plant yields the maximum, it gives the maximum yield for the chemical constituent. When the senna leaves should be collected before the flowering, isn't it? Then and then only we will get the maximum yield. Maybe at that particular time it contains the maximum amount of the glycoside, isn't it? And it will show the laxative action. Furthermore, while collecting the herbal material, sometimes the skilled labor is required or the trained personnel. Take example of the opium poppy. How the latex is being collected from the opium poppy? By making an incision. So after incision, what will happen? The latex, milky white latex, it oozes out from the opium poppy, and such things should be collected. The poppy is very small, and the experienced personnel or experienced labor can handle the opium poppy. Furthermore, he or she will make the incision, and they will collect the opium from the same plant. So the skilled labor should be employed as they are trained to identify and select the herb at a proper stage. They know when the things should be collected, from which plant, and so on. They are having the certain knowledge. They are trained for that particular thing, isn't it? So the trained personnel or skilled labor are required for the collection of the herbal raw material. The age of plant also plays a vital factor for their selection. Furthermore, collection. Whatever the age of plant is there, say for example, we want to collect the cinnamon bark or cassia bark. Yes, definitely there is a need to consider the age of that particular bark or particular plant. Then and then only, furthermore, cutting and all those things, we have to suppose to remove the bark. Means there is a need to consider the age of the plant also. Furthermore, if the plants are having the certain defects, or you can say the certain, it is diseased one, such plants should not be collected as a herbal raw material. So there is a need to give due consideration to the diseased plant, and it should be rejected while collecting the herbal raw material. The two basic factors which needs to be considered during the collection, these are the plants should be collected when it is reached with the active medicament, that is a active constituents, they are at a maximum level. And second point, that is after drying, it should give the maximum quality and the appearance. So these 2 points needs to be considered while collecting the herbal raw material. Furthermore, during the collection, there is a need to consider the environmental factors also, isn't it? Because in a particular environment, maybe certain plants, they are having the higher yielding capacity, or they might have the maximum amount of the chemical constituents. So there should be due consideration should be given to the environmental factors such as light, humidity, altitude, rainfall, soil type, and so on. So these are the things which needs to be considered while collecting the herb. Furthermore, we are going to discuss how the various plant parts are being collected. See, whatever we have discussed, these are the general guidelines for the collection of the herbal raw material. Now, let us see how the various plant parts are being collected. And very first one, that is the roots and rhizome. Maybe you are aware about the ginger, haldi. They are from the category of roots and rhizomes, isn't it? When it should be collected, say for example, the raulfia, licorice, when it should be collected, there is a proper things are there which are given. And for the roots, roots should be collected beginning of the spring season, just before the flowering. Before the flowering. So whatever the roots of plants are there, if they are having active constituents, then it should be collected beginning of the spring before the flowering. In a similar way, the rhizomes are collected during the productive phase when they are contain maximum amount of reserve food. Yes, and having the maximum amount of active constituents. So roots are collected in the beginning of the spring season, just before the flowering, and rhizomes are collected during the reproductive phase when they contain a maximum amount of the reserve food stores and the active constituents. For example, licorice and the raulfia. The next plant part, there is the leaves. Take an example of a senna and belladonna. When the senna and belladonna leaves should be collected, it should be collected before the plant reaches to the flowering stage. Before the flowering, the plant leaves should be collected. Similarly, in the case of flowers, flowers should be collected before pollination. So flowers are collected before pollination takes place, and they are collected when weather is dry and especially during the morning hours. For example, clovers and the saffron. Okay, the next plant part, the bark. So when bark should be collected, so there are various barks are there which are being used for the medicinal purpose. Say for example, cinnamon bark, cassia bark, and so on. So the time period for the collection, it is going to be differ from plant to plant for the collection of bark. So the bark is to be collected during spring, early summer, and the winter. The age of tree at the time of collection is an important thing. So when we are collecting the bark from the certain plants, there is a need to consider the age of the plant. There are three methods are there which are widely used for the collection of bark. The very first method, that is known as a filling method. Second one, that is known as the uprooting method. And third one, that is known as the coppicing method. So in the case of uprooting method, whatever fully grown plant is there, it is being removed from the soil, isn't it? And stems are being cut and the bark is being collected. That is known as the uprooting method. In the case of filling method, the trees are cut from the base and the bark is peeled out. That is known as the filling method. And the last method, which is widely used, that is known as the coppicing method. And in this method, the plant is cut at a certain distance from soil, leaving behind the stump, that is known as a stool. And stool gives out new shoots which are cut off to collect their barks. And this method is highly economical and rapid. For example, cinnamon and the cascara bark. Let us move towards how the gums and latexes are being collected. I have shown the images related with the acacia and the opium. Both the images. In the first case, there is an acacia which is going to be exuded from the stem, and in the second case, the incision is being made, and the milky white liquid, it is going to be oozes out from the opium poppy. So gums and latexes, these are obtained by making the incisions on plant parts and are then collected immediately as they are oozes out. The examples are acacia and opium. Moving towards the fruits. Say for example, amla. So fruits are being collected from the plants when they are fully grown in size, either ripe in state or unripe in state. For example, amla. Let us move towards the WHO guidelines for collection of herbs. Okay, we have seen already the certain tips, certain guidelines related with the collection of herbal raw material. Apart from these, the World Health Organization also they have given the certain guidelines for the collection of the herbal raw material. Just we are going to revise it. So very first one, there is a cutters or harvesters must be maintained so that the contamination from soil particles is reduced to minimum level. For certain plants, we are using the cutters and harvesters. If these harvesters are not maintained well, there might be chances of the contamination of collected material with the soil, and that needs to be considered. The second point is harvested medicinal plants should not come into direct contact with the dirt or it gets contaminated. It must be immediately gathered and transported in a dry, clean condition. So whatever the harvested medicinal plant material is there, it should not be came into direct contact with the dirt. It must be immediately gathered and transported in a dry and clean condition. During the cutting, see, we are using the cutters and harvesters, isn't it? So we are using the cutters. So during cutting, care should be taken to ensure that no dangerous weeds bleeds with the medicinal plant. There are some other grown plants are there, isn't it? So it should be automatically rejected and only required things should be collected by the cutter. All containers and holders utilized during collection must be clean and free from contamination from the past harvest. So whatever the containers are there, whatever the holders are there, because same equipment we are using for the cutting of the various medicinal plants, and whatever previous things are there, it should be removed, it should be cleaned, isn't it? At the point when containers are not being used, say for example, we are not using any container from that particular equipment, they should be kept in a dry conditions, free of bugs and out of reach to mice, rodents, domesticated animals and residential creatures. When these equipments or the containers, cutters we are not using, isn't it, then it should be stored in a such way that it should be free with the bugs, out of reach to the mice, rodents, domesticated animals and the residential creatures. Let us move further. So whatever the medicinal plants are there, it should be collected when they are at a most ideal quality for proposed utilization. So whatever medicinal plant is there, it should be collected at ideal time. Whatever the damaged plant or the plant parts, it should be avoided, it should be rejected. Then the medicinal plants should be collected under the most ideal conditions, keeping away from wet soil, dew, rain, high air humidity. And in a case when the collection happens in a wet condition, possible adverse effects should be checked because of expanded dampness level. The mechanical harm and compacting of medicinal plants that can be bring undesirable quality changes must be avoided. Sometimes what happens, we are compacting the material in order to decrease the space, in order to decrease the space. In this regard, the consideration must be paid towards the overloading of sacks and the stacking up of sacks. So there should not be any mechanical injury to the collected raw material during the packaging. Newly collected medicinal plant must be conveyed as fast as possible to the handling office with a specific end goal to avoid contamination. So these are the some of the guidelines which are given by the WHO, and these guidelines should be followed in order to collect the specific herbal material. Let us move towards the certain examples of the plants and herbs, how it is going to be collected. And the first example of a plant part is the leaves. For example, digitalis and belladonna. Then the leaves of digitalis and belladonna should be collected. It should be collected before maturity and before flowering. So whatever the leaves are there, if we are collecting the leaves of medicinal plants, it should be collected before maturity and before flowering of the plant. Similarly, whatever the flowers are there, it should be collected before pollination or the maturity in the morning before sunrise. For example, clove, saffron, and rose. Then the roots are being collected when aerial growth of plant stops. It is being indicated by the plant, and the examples are bidania and the ginseng. Then the rhizomes are being collected when the aerial growth of plant stops, when it is having a high reserve food, when it is having a maximum reserve food material. The examples are ginger and turmeric. Then the stem should be collected after maturity. For example, kalmek and the ephedra. Then the bark should be collected in the spring or early summer after damp weather, when it separates readily from the wood. For example, ashoka and arjuna. Then the seeds are being collected after maturity. It should be washed and freed from pulp. For example, nux vomica. Then the fruits are being collected when they are in the ripe state or half ripe or fully maturated. For example, coriander, dill, and bell. Similarly, the resins are being collected after oozing from the plant in a dry weather. Is it possible to collect the resins during the rainy season? No, it might get contaminated with so many other things. So it should be collected in a dry weather only. For example, balsam of Tolu and balsam of Peru. Then the gums are being collected after oozing out when it dries or hardens. For example, acacia and the tragacan. Then the latex it is being collected after oozing out after coagulation. For example, papaya and opium. Similarly, the heartwood and pod, it should be collected after maturity. For example, sandalwood. Okay. So in this way, the plant parts should be collected. Let us see the harvesting of the herbal material. There are 5 ways are there by which we can harvest the material. So the first one, by manual and skilled workers. It is being used for the flowers, leaves like tea leaves, vinca leaves, senna leaves, digitalis, and belladonna. Here the advantage is when we are using the skilled manpower or worker, that is a selectivity and sorting by hand. That is the main important thing. As these skilled labor, they are utilizing their knowledge to collect the proper flower, to collect the proper leaves which are at the maturity stage. But it is having the certain problems, like it is a laborious, time consuming, and costly. So these are the certain disadvantages of the manual when we are using the manual and skilled workers for the harvesting or collection. Then mechanical diggers, it is being used for the roots, rhizomes, and tubers. When we are using the mechanical diggers, it is advantageous in terms of it is economical and washing is possible simultaneously. Similarly, the seed strippers and separators are being used to separate the seeds or collect the seeds and bark like cork. It saves time and labor. Then machine harvesters, threshers, and winnowers, which are being used for the seeds, grains, and some fruits. It saves the time and the labor. So in this way, the harvesting, it is going to be done. So in short, in this session, we have discussed the various steps involved in selection, identification, authentication, cultivation, and collection of herbal material.